Is the thumbnail a nod to Adam Ragusea? It certainly is. Whenever I say something cute about another YouTube channel, some viewers immediately go to dark places. I am not being snarky. I seriously love Adam's content. And yes, one of the secrets to my bolognese is that I brown the pot and not the meat. But let's start the story in the beginning. Last year, I had a life-changing bolognese in a restaurant in Portland, Maine called Leeward. I really didn't think it was possible to surprise me with bolognese. I didn't even order it. I wanted something more interesting. But my husband ordered it, and it was indeed to die for. So, did I ask them for a recipe? No. First of all, getting recipes from restaurant chefs is unlikely. Even if you get one, they'll leave out most of the juicy details. Second of all, this is cooking, not baking. With enough persistence, it's totally possible to recreate this at home. And after about 10 tries, in my mind, I have succeeded. Whether my recipe is anything like Leeward's, I have no idea. Texture-wise, possibly. I now grind my own meat for bolognese, and I believe they do too. But flavor-wise, we might be taking different paths to achieve the same goal. The goal here is layers and layers of Maillard reaction and umami. I have incorporated ideas from Samin Nosrat, Kenji Lopez-Alt, and my new favorite YouTube channel, W2 Kitchen. The links for all of them are below. And now, let's cook! We'll need some very finely diced carrots, celery, and onions. The amount of vegetables is flexible. Feel free to eyeball. If finely dicing all these vegetables is difficult, you can coarsely chop them and then pulse them in a food processor. They don't need to be square, they just need to be small, but not pureed. We'll also need about 6 garlic cloves, finely minced or put through a garlic press. Now that our veggies are prepped, let's talk about meat. My first breakthrough on my quest for the perfect bolognese was a complete accident. I used coarsely ground pork from a little grocery store in my area. Hi, Tilly and Selvies! And voila! The texture got a lot better. Since no one near me sells coarsely ground beef, I decided to take matters into my own hands and to grind my own beef and pork. That's when the texture became truly spectacular. You'd think that these bigger pieces would make the sauce more grainy, but it's just the opposite. They cook to perfect softness and don't cross-link nearly as much as finely ground supermarket meat. If you don't want to grind the meat yourself, I don't blame you. I used to avoid it like the plague. And that's because I was using the meat grinder all wrong. So let me save you some trouble and help you learn from my mistakes. The first KitchenAid grinding attachment that I got 20 years ago left a strange black residue on my meat. I searched the internet far and wide but couldn't figure out what it was. It took me years to get over my fear of grinding meat and to try another KitchenAid attachment. This time, I read the instructions, and guess what? You can't put the blade and the discs into a dishwasher. Here's what I'm guessing happened with my first grinder. I dishwashed the grinding discs and they rusted, and that rust got on my meat. With the new grinder, I wash everything by hand, and so far I've had no problems. For easier grinding, it helps to keep both the grinder and the meat extremely cold. I put the grinder and all its parts into the freezer the night before. Make sure you assemble the grinder before freezing so that you don't freeze your hands off trying to put it together. The meat should be stiff, but not completely frozen. I put it in my freezer for an hour before grinding. I find that it takes less room in the freezer if I freeze the meat right in its packaging. After an hour, it becomes stiff, but still very easy to cut. My favorite cut for bolognese are boneless pork shoulder, also known as Boston butt, and boneless short ribs. This cut is very confusing and it deserves a bit of a discussion. You'd think that these were bone-in short ribs with the bone removed, but they are not. Boneless short ribs come from the same muscle as bone-in short ribs, serratus ventralis, but from a different part of a cow. This broad muscle extends from the plate to the chuck, where it becomes thinner and slightly less marbled. The bone-in short ribs are cut from the plate and the boneless short ribs are cut from the chuck. This cut is almost as good as bone-in short ribs and almost as cheap as chuck. If you can't find it, chuck blade roast or any well-marbled cut from the chuck area is a good option. You can use any mix of beef and pork. Today I have slightly more pork than beef. The total amount of meat is 4.5 pounds, which is a lot. I figured if I am dirtying a meat grinder and running the oven for 3 hours, I should make a huge batch. Bolognese lasts perfectly in the fridge for at least a week and can be frozen for months. But if you don't have a big pot, cut this recipe in half. Cut all the meat into chunks that can easily fit the feeding tube of your grinder and feed them through the disc with the biggest holes. You might want to push up on the meat tray at the same time as you're pushing the meat down through the feed tube so that your mixer doesn't tip over. Once all the meat is through, put a crumpled paper towel through the feed tube to push the remainder of the meat out and stop as soon as you hear weird noises. Disassemble the grinder. There is our paper towel. Rinse out the meat and put all the parts into a big bowl of soapy water. The only part I don't soak is the knife so that I don't accidentally cut myself. Then rinse everything out and check the instructions in your meat grinder manual about which parts need to be dried by hand. Learn from my mistakes and don't allow things to rust. There is a huge controversy over whether or not you should brown the meat for bolognese. From a flavor perspective, it's good. My reaction equals yum. But from a texture perspective, it's bad. It toughens the meat. My previous strategy was to get the meat to the cooked gray stage, but not to brown it on the stovetop. Once the sauce was assembled, I put it in the oven uncovered for 3 hours. And this produced browning on top of the sauce and gave it more depth of flavor. We're still going to use the oven method, because that's by far the best way to cook any stew or braise, but we're going to take the Maillard reaction to a whole new level by browning the pot. I know it sounds weird, but you'll see. Set your Dutch oven over high heat, minus 7.5 quarts. When it's hot, add enough vegetable oil to cover the bottom. Swirl it around. Add just enough meat to cover the bottom of the pot. Don't crowd it to avoid steaming. Leave it alone just until you start to see a hint of color. Only a hint, no more. Get the meat out with a slotted spoon and wait for the bottom of the pot to become golden brown before adding the next batch. With each batch, the bottom of the pot will get a little darker. Some of the batches might release a bit of juice. If that happens, wait for the juice to evaporate and the bottom of the pot to become golden brown before adding more meat. The first batch of meat might be completely pale when you get it out, but the next batch will pick up the brown bits left over by the previous batch. Although you could do all the browning in one pot, I prefer to use a second one to speed things up. My 12-inch skillet with straight sides is perfect because it gives me a huge area for browning. Once the last batch of meat is out, turn down the heat to moderately low and wait until the bottom of the pot is beautifully brown. Add the carrots, celery and onions. You can do this in either pot. I'm doing it in my stainless steel pot since on the stovetop it cooks more evenly than the Dutch oven. Stir in the salt. Add 3 tablespoons of butter, cover and let it steam for 5 minutes. Uncover and continue to cook gently, stirring occasionally until the vegetables are completely tender and just starting to brown. Be patient. This will take about 15 to 20 minutes. Add the garlic and a pinch of salt and cook stirring for a couple of minutes or just until it gets aromatic. For the final assembly, I will move everything to the Dutch oven since it's deeper. Let's add the meat, black pepper, and the cooked veggies. Take the potato masher and break up any meat clumps that form during cooking. Since I ground the meat myself, it hasn't cross-linked much, and this step is pretty quick. If you used store-bought ground meat, you'll need to do a bit more work with the masher. Here's what the texture should look like. Traditionally, milk is added at this point and simmered gently until it evaporates. The most common explanation that I've heard for milk is that it protects the meat from the acidity of tomatoes and wine. I've tried making bolognese with and without the milk and couldn't tell the difference, so I'm skipping the milk. The only tomato product that I used to add to my bolognese were the canned tomatoes, but I recently got Samin Nosrat's new book, Good Things, and I noticed that she uses both canned tomatoes and tomato paste in her lazy sugo recipe. I tried it and loved it. Tomato paste gives the sauce more intensity. I am lucky today because one of my students, Angela, brought me unbelievably good homemade canned tomatoes. These are already pureed, but if you're buying tomatoes, the good quality certified San Marzano are sold whole. You can break them up with a flat wooden spoon right in the pot or remove a couple of tomatoes and buzz the rest right in the can with an immersion blender. This is a good time to preheat your oven to 300 degrees. Here is advice from Marcella Hazan's book. Do not use a demi-glace or other concentrates that tip the balance of flavors toward harshness. It took me 20 years to break this rule. Thank you, W2 Kitchen, for inspiring this rebellion. Now that I've tried demi-glace, there is no going back. I don't know what Marcella meant by harshness. Demi-glace gives the sauce more meatiness and more gelatin. To me, those are very desirable qualities in a meat sauce. My demi-glace is made with roasted chicken. It's just my very reduced chicken stock. I've made it on my channel many different ways. It just took me a few years to realize that calling it demi-glace can clear up the confusion over how reduced it is. This is reduced 4 times. In other words, 4 cups of stock were boiled down to 1. What if you don't want to make this? If you can find a D'Artagnan frozen demi-glace, that will work. You can also bloom a packet of powdered gelatin in 1 cup of water and use that instead of demi-glace. But I don't recommend using store-bought demi-glace sold in the shelf-stable aisle of your supermarket. The goal here is gelatin, and these fake demi-glace products have very little, if any, gelatin. You can also use good quality gelatinous stock that's not reduced. It can be made out of anything really, beef, pork, or chicken. Just use a bigger volume. Instead of 3/4 cups of demi-glace, use about 3 cups of unreduced stock and reduce the amount of wine. Nutmeg is very traditional in bolognese. It's hard to measure if you're grating your own, but I'd guess it's about 1/4 teaspoon. Later on, I'll also add a cinnamon stick, a couple star anise, and a couple of bay leaves. All of these are optional, but they give the sauce a much more complex aroma. I'm using Charles Shaw Sauvignon Blanc from Trader Joe's. Any cheap Sauvignon Blanc or any cheap unoaked dry white wine will work. The total amount I ended up adding was 4 cups. Since a bottle only has 3 cups, you're welcome to replace the 4th cup with water. The next 2 ingredients are optional and completely untraditional. I'm adding 2 tablespoons of soy sauce and 2 tablespoons of fish sauce. I got this idea from Kenji. When you taste the final product, you'd never guess that it contains soy sauce and fish sauce. Adding a few Parmesan rinds would be a more traditional way to up the umami, but I don't always have rinds on hand, and I do find soy sauce and fish sauce to be more potent. Taste your sauce for salt. It should be slightly undersalted at this point because it will reduce a lot in the oven. How much salt you'll need will depend on the salt level of your tomato products and whether or not you're using soy sauce and fish sauce. Luckily, Bolognese is very easy to adjust during serving. If your final sauce comes out too bland, add more salt before serving. You can salt your pasta water very aggressively and add a splash to your Bolognese when you're tossing it with pasta. If your Bolognese comes out too salty, don't salt your pasta water as much as you normally would and use it to dilute your sauce. Remember that this is not a soup. This sauce will be coating your pasta in a thin layer, so by the end it should be a tad too salty to eat on its own. Put the uncovered pot into a 300-degree oven for 3 hours. If you can, stir it once during this time. Here it is after slightly more than 2 hours. You see all the browning on top of the meat and on the sides of the pot? Let's stir it in to spread this flavor evenly through the meat. I push the sauce up the sides of the pot to help it pick up the brown bits. Put it back in the oven, and at the 3-hour mark, your meat should be pillowy soft. Remove the bay leaves and the spices and pat yourself on the back for accomplishing this epic sauce. Since we broke all the rules of Bolognese already, I don't see why we should stop now. I know the sauce is traditionally served with pappardelle or some other ribbon pasta, but I believe that rigatoni work better because they trap the sauce inside their tubes. That's how Leeward in Portland serves their Bolognese, and I can't imagine a better combination. By the way, I've agonized greatly about whether I should use the Italian pronunciation Bolognese or the English Bolognese, and whether the restaurant in Portland is pronounced like the original nautical term Leeward or Leeward. Based on the comments I get, it seems to me that people have stronger feelings about how things are pronounced than how they are cooked. So I just wanted to clarify that I'm fully aware of multiple pronunciations of these terms. Here are more very detailed culinary tutorials for you to check out, and if you are ever in the Boston area, maybe I'll see you in one of my classes.